The lamp on my little wooden table flickered at night, and the shadows danced across the cracked walls of this house. My hands, wrinkled and tired, rested on my lap, and you, my sweet child, sat at my feet with wide, curious eyes. I knew I had hidden my pain for too long. Therefore, I took a deep breath, and I began to tell you the truth. Do you know what your father once allowed? I whispered, my voice heavy, like stones pressing on my chest. Your mother, your daughter-in-law's mother, looked me in the eyes and said I was nothing but a maid. That I was useless. That my only worth was to scrub her floors, wash her clothes, and cook her meals. And your father, my only son, sat in the same room and said nothing. The silence that followed my words was so thick it seemed the walls themselves were listening. You leaned closer, your small hand slipping into mine. I closed my eyes, and the years rolled back. I saw myself at 77, bent like a tree weathered by storms, scrubbing floors until my knees ached, carrying laundry heavier than my bones could bear, and standing in the kitchen with tears that no one cared to see. Every day began before the sun rose. I would stand barefoot on the cold tiles, preparing their breakfast, laying out clothes, making sure everything was perfect. Therefore, when they finally woke up, they walked into a warm home that looked effortless. But the effort was mine, my broken back, my shaking hands, my sleepless nights. And still, I was invisible. Mom, Sarah likes things done a certain way, my son used to say, never meeting my eyes. His voice was soft, but it was not for me. It was for her. Always for her. But do you know, child, what hurt the most? It wasn't the endless chores. It wasn't the way she ordered me around like I was a servant. It was his silence. His silence screamed louder than her insults. Because silence from someone you gave your whole life to feels like betrayal carved into your soul. I paused, and you looked up at me with tears glistening in your eyes. I pressed your small hand and continued. One Christmas night stands out in my memory more than the rest. I had worked all day, cooked the roast, baked pies, decorated the tree, polished the silver until it shone like a mirror. The table was beautiful, the fire crackled, and I thought, maybe tonight, they will see me. But as I bent to serve the food, Sarah laughed and said, look at her, 77 and still running around like our maid. If she wasn't here, we'd have to hire someone. Everyone laughed. Everyone, except me. My son lowered his eyes and said nothing. Therefore, I forced a smile, though my heart felt like shattered glass. I returned to the kitchen and quietly cried into the dishwater, my tears mixing with the soap. Do you see, child? That is how dignity dies, not in loud explosions, but in the small, silent moments when the ones you love refuse to stand for you. But I survived. That is what I need you to understand. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every ignored tear, I survived it. And in my survival, I learned something important. Silence can break you, but it can also shape you. That night, as I lay in my bed, my hands aching from scrubbing and my body shivering from exhaustion, I made a vow. I swore that one day, I would no longer live as their maid. One day, I would rise again with dignity. One day, they would see the strength of the woman they tried to bury. I opened my eyes and looked at you again. That is why I tell you this story, I said softly. Because pain is a teacher, and silence is a test. And though your father failed me, I want you to learn differently. I want you to know that love should never be silent when injustice stands before you. You nodded, your little chin trembling as though you could feel the weight of the years pressing against me. Therefore, my story begins not with peace, but with betrayal. And yet, child, betrayal is only the beginning. What follows is survival, and survival leads to truth. Child, when you hear me speak about those years, you might think I was weak because I stayed. But therefore, let me explain something that only age can teach you. Sometimes survival is not about running away, but about standing in the storm, day after day, until the storm itself begins to fear you. After that Christmas night, my heart felt heavy, but I kept going. I rose each morning before the sun touched the sky. I scrubbed the floors until my knees burned. I washed their clothes until my fingers cracked. I cooked meals that filled their stomachs, but never their hearts. And every time my daughter-in-law barked orders at me, I bit down on my tongue and obeyed. Why, you may ask? Because of my son. Because the boy I had raised with lullabies and sleepless nights was still there, somewhere behind the silence he gave me. Therefore, I endured, hoping one day he would open his eyes and defend me. But that day never came. One evening, Sarah returned home in a fury. She had misplaced her gold bracelet and immediately accused me. You must have taken it, she spat, her eyes sharp like knives. Why else would it be gone? My son sat on the couch, shifting uncomfortably. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then lowered his gaze and stayed quiet. I stood there, trembling, clutching my apron. I have never stolen a thing in my life, I whispered. Then prove it, she snapped. She tore through my small room, pulling open drawers, tossing my folded clothes to the floor. She found nothing, of course, but the humiliation had already been planted like a seed in my chest. Therefore, that night, as I picked up my scattered belongings, I realized that silence was no longer just painful, it was dangerous. Because silence, when joined with cruelty, becomes a weapon. But still, I stayed. Because where else could I go? At 77, with no money of my own, this roof was all I had. And because deep inside, I carried a secret, one that no one knew. You see, when your grandfather passed away, he left something for me. He left me an inheritance, money that could have changed everything. But I never told my son or Sarah. Why? Because I wanted to see their hearts clearly. I wanted to know whether they would love me for me, or only for what I had. Therefore, I lived as if I had nothing. And in doing so, I discovered the truth of their souls. But child, let me tell you about the nights. Those long, endless nights when the world was quiet, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sometimes I prayed for death, just to be free of the shame. Other times, I prayed for strength, to endure one more day. And sometimes, I prayed for a miracle, that my son would remember the woman who once carried him on her hip, wiped his tears, and sang him to sleep. Yet, every morning, I woke to the same harsh reality, my son's silence and Sarah's cruelty. One day, Sarah's friends came over. They sat in the living room, sipping tea I had prepared, their laughter echoing through the walls. And then I heard her say it. This old woman is nothing but a burden. She eats our food, uses our space, and works like a maid. If she weren't here, life would be so much easier. Her friends giggled. My son sat there, saying nothing, just staring into his cup. Therefore, I understood, in that moment, that I was invisible, not a mother, not a human being, only a shadow that moved through their house. But let me tell you something, child, even shadows can hold secrets. Even shadows can grow sharp. I began to keep a journal. At night, after everyone had gone to bed, I wrote down every word, every insult, every moment of silence. I poured my pain onto those pages, not because I thought anyone would read them, but because writing was the only way to keep my soul alive. And slowly, something began to change inside me. My tears became less frequent. My heart, though scarred, became stronger. I stopped begging for love, and instead, I began to prepare for truth. Therefore, when Sarah snapped at me, I no longer flinched. When my son looked away, I no longer expected him to speak. I began to carry myself with quiet dignity, because I knew something they did not know, that one day, the truth would come, and when it did, their laughter would turn to shame. Child, I tell you all of this not to make you sad, but to help you understand, life is not always kind. Sometimes the very people you love most will betray you. But survival is not about their actions, it is about your response. And my response was this: I endured, I waited, and I carried my secret close to my heart. For years, I walked through that fire, and though it burned me, it did not destroy me. And one day, though they never saw it, I looked in the mirror and realized something powerful. I was not their maid. I was not their burden. I was a woman who had survived heartbreak, poverty, and betrayal. And that made me stronger than both of them combined. Therefore, child, never mistake endurance for weakness. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep standing when the world wants you to fall. And I stood. Oh, how I stood. But as I tell you this now, with your small hand in mine, I must confess, standing was only the beginning. Because eventually, the time came when truth knocked on the door, and the storm I had endured for so long finally met the storm I carried inside me. And that, my child, is where the story truly turns. Child, when storms brew long enough, they don't just pass quietly, they break with thunder. And so it was with my life. After years of silence, humiliation, and endurance, the day of truth finally arrived. It began on an ordinary morning. The winter sun was low, spilling a dull grey light into the kitchen. I was peeling potatoes for Sarah's dinner party, my hands stiff from cold and age. She stormed in, her heels clicking on the tile. "You're too slow," she snapped. "Hurry up. Guests will be here in 2 hours." I nodded quietly, my knife moving steadily. My son followed behind her, glancing at me but saying nothing. His silence had become as familiar to me as the beating of my own heart, constant, painful, and unchanging. But therefore, something in the air felt different that day. My bones knew it before my mind did. Because while they prepared to celebrate, a knock came at the door that would unravel everything. It was a lawyer. A tall man in a dark coat, holding a briefcase. He introduced himself politely and asked to speak with the family. Sarah's painted smile faltered, and my son shifted uneasily. They invited him inside, thinking perhaps it was some official error or paperwork. But child, I knew. I had been waiting for this knock for years. The lawyer opened his briefcase and placed an envelope on the table. "I'm here regarding the estate of Mr. William Carter," he said, "your grandfather. As executor of his will, I'm required to read out certain details now that conditions have matured." Sarah's eyes widened. My son leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What estate?" he asked, his voice uncertain. The lawyer cleared his throat. At the time of his passing, Mr. Carter left behind a sum of $6 million, placed in trust for his wife, Mrs. Evelyn Carter. The room froze. The knife slipped from my fingers and clattered into the sink. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. My son stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. 6 million. The number hung heavy in the air, thicker than the winter fog outside. The lawyer continued, "The conditions of the trust specified that Mrs. Carter alone had the authority to manage or disclose these funds. She has chosen." But I raised my hand. My voice, steady but soft, filled the room. "No. Let me speak." For years, I had been silent. For years, I had bowed my head. But therefore, that moment was mine, and I would not let anyone else carry my words. I looked at my son, my boy, the child I had once nursed at my breast, the young man I had cheered for at baseball games, the husband I had blessed at his wedding. Tears welled in my eyes. "You let her call me useless. You let her treat me like dirt under her shoes. You watched, and you said nothing." His lips parted, but no words came. I turned to Sarah. Her face was pale, her body stiff. "You ordered me around your house like a maid. You accused me of theft. You told your friends I was nothing but a burden. But you were wrong. I carried your meals to the table not because I was beneath you, but because I was above your cruelty. I endured because I was waiting for truth. And now, truth is here. Sarah's voice cracked. We didn't know. Exactly, I cut in. You didn't know, because I wanted to see your hearts. And I saw them, clear as glass. Greed. Arrogance. Cruelty. And my son, cowardice. My grandson, your uncle, shuffled in from the hallway then, still a teenager, confusion written all over his face. He had heard everything. His eyes darted between us, wide and innocent, not yet poisoned by bitterness. My heart softened, but only for him. The lawyer cleared his throat again. Mrs. Carter, how would you like to proceed with the estate? I stood tall, straighter than I had in years. I will not share a single penny with those who disrespected me. Not 1 cent. Sarah's mouth fell open. My son stepped forward. Mother, please. But I held up my hand. Do not call me mother when you've treated me as less than human. You had 9 years to call me that with love, and you chose silence instead. The lawyer nodded and closed his briefcase. Very well. I'll arrange everything as per your instruction. Silence filled the room after he left. Sarah stormed out, her heels striking like thunder. My son remained, his face crumbling, his voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret? I looked at him long and hard. Because I wanted to see if you would love me without money. And now I know the answer. He reached for me, but I stepped back. My tears fell, but they were not weak tears. They were the cleansing kind, the kind that burns away illusion and leaves only truth behind. Therefore, child, that day marked the end of something, and the beginning of something else. I left their house with only a small suitcase, the same way I had arrived. But this time, I walked with dignity. I walked with power. With the inheritance, I rebuilt a home of my own, a warm, small house where I could live in peace. I supported charities, I funded scholarships, I helped widows and children who had no one else. Because money, my dear, is not for pride or greed. It is for purpose. As for my son and Sarah, life taught them its own lessons. Their debts grew heavy, their friends scattered, and their marriage cracked beneath the weight of their selfishness. I did not need to lift a finger for revenge, life itself became my justice. But the sweetest revenge, child, was not their downfall. It was my survival. It was the fact that after all their cruelty, I am still here, telling my story, holding your hand, passing down. Not just pain but wisdom. And the moral, my dear, is this: never let anyone tell you that you are useless. Because sometimes, the ones they call useless are the very ones who hold the greatest strength, the deeper secrets, and the last word. Therefore, live with dignity. Love with sincerity. And when others betray you, remember this old woman's story: the storm may beat you down, but if you endure, one day you will rise, and the thunder will be yours.